I stood by my office window, the Manhattan skyline shimmering like it had been painted just for me. The glass was warm under my fingertips, the late afternoon sun spilling gold across my desk. My silk blouse clung gently to my shoulders, and the faint hum of the espresso machine in the corner made the place feel like home. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, a name I hadn't seen in years. Mom. For a second, my breath caught. My thumb hovered over the screen before I swiped to answer. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. There was a pause. Then her voice came, hesitant. "Emily, we're in New York for the weekend. Your father and I thought maybe we could see you." I could almost hear the air thicken between us, like she wasn't just asking to see me. She was asking to walk into the life they'd always pretended didn't exist. I let my eyes drift around my office, the dark walnut shelves lined with books, the framed Ivy League diploma gleaming above my desk, the subtle scent of fresh peonies in the vase by the window. A space they'd never imagined I could belong in. And yet here I was. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch before answering. "Sure, Mom," I said finally. "Come by." My office is at Columbia's alumni building. The irony? They wouldn't even be allowed past the front gates. It was 6 years ago, on a sticky June afternoon in Ohio, when I realized my parents would never see me the way I needed them to. I'd just come back from my last college exam, adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. I walked into the kitchen clutching the letter from my university, confirmation that I'd be graduating summa cum laude. "Mom, Dad," I'd said, grinning. "You have to read this." My dad didn't even look up from his laptop. "Emily, I'm busy. Just leave it on the counter." Mom was flipping through a catalog, her nails clicking against the glossy pages. "We'll celebrate later," she murmured, like she was talking about picking up milk, not my 4 years of work. "I graduate next Saturday," I said, forcing a laugh. "Can you both make it?" Dad sighed. "Emily, you know your brother's baseball finals are that weekend." I felt the words like a stone in my stomach. "So, you're going to his game instead of my graduation?" Mom's eyes flicked up, annoyed. "Don't make it a big deal. You're just walking across a stage. We've been to a dozen of those for your cousins." It wasn't just the dismissal. It was the way they'd already decided which child mattered more. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling as I held a small silver locket. My grandmother had given it to me before she passed, a tiny engraving inside. "Know your worth." She was the only one who had ever believed I could do something extraordinary. The next morning, I made a decision. I would leave Ohio, leave the small-town gossip, leave the constant feeling of being less. I didn't know where I'd end up, but I knew this. I would build a life so undeniable that they'd have no choice but to notice. And I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching me get there. New York didn't welcome me with open arms. It swallowed me whole. I arrived with 2 suitcases, $800 in my checking account, and a one-way bus ticket from Cleveland. My first apartment was a 5th-floor walk-up in Queens that smelled faintly of fried onions and mildew. The radiator hissed all night, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's alarm clock before my own. My first job was as a receptionist at a small publishing firm. I made just enough to pay rent and eat dollar-slice pizza. But every night, I stayed late, watching the editors work, studying the manuscripts they marked up, listening to how they spoke to authors. I didn't just want to answer phones. I wanted to be in the room where decisions were made. It was during one of those late nights that I met Margaret Lane, the firm's senior editor, a sharp, silver-haired woman with a voice that could cut glass but eyes that softened when she looked at me. "You're still here?" she asked, setting her leather bag on her desk. "I'm learning," I admitted, embarrassed. She smiled, not a polite smile, but the kind that says I see you. "Good. Then let's make it official. I'll mentor you, but you'll work twice as hard as anyone else here."
Can you handle that?
I didn't hesitate. Yes. The next 3 years were a blur of 12-hour days, night classes, and endless editing assignments. Margaret pushed me to apply to graduate school, not just any program, but Columbia's Ivy League Masters in Publishing. I laughed at first. "Margaret, people like me don't get into places like that," I said. Her reply was simple. Emily, people like you are exactly who belongs there. You just don't believe it yet. I applied. I was accepted. I didn't tell my parents. My social media stayed carefully curated. A few coffee shop photos, the occasional book recommendation. No cap and gown selfies. No hints of the life I was building. At Columbia, I found my rhythm. The campus smelled of rain-soaked ivy in the spring, and the library's marble floors echoed under my heels as I carried stacks of research. I was surrounded by people who dreamed big, who didn't see ambition as arrogance. My first published book as an editor hit the bestseller list 6 months after graduation. My salary doubled, then tripled. Soon after, I moved into my current office. Corner view, walnut shelves, fresh peonies every Monday. And still my parents had no idea. Because some victories are meant to be savored in silence until the right moment comes to share them. They arrived 20 minutes late. I was standing by the front desk of the Columbia University Alumni Center when I saw them walk in. My father in his ever-present baseball cap, my mother in a floral blouse that looked almost exactly like the one she wore the day she skipped my graduation. Emily, Mom said, her voice laced with that careful politeness people use when they're not sure how to act.
Mom.
Dad. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile I used to give them. This one was measured, intentional. Wow, Dad said, glancing around the marble lobby. Fancy place. How'd you get access here? I tilted my head slightly. I work here. They exchanged a look, the kind they used to give each other when I said something they didn't quite believe. The receptionist, Angela, appeared. Miss Carter, your conference room is ready. I led them down the hall, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The glass walls of the conference room overlooked the quad, where students in Columbia sweatshirts crossed the lawn, backpacks slung over one shoulder. Nice view, Mom said, settling into one of the leather chairs. I took my seat at the head of the table. In front of me sat a slim portfolio. Inside, my Ivy League diploma. Before we talk, there's something I want you to see. I slid the diploma toward them. The gold-embossed seal caught the sunlight streaming through the window. Dad's brows pulled together. Columbia University? I graduated 2 years ago. Master's in publishing. Full honors. My voice was calm, almost casual, but my heart was thudding against my ribs. Mom blinked. Why didn't you tell us? Because, I said, leaning back, the last time I had something to celebrate, you chose a baseball game over my graduation. Silence. The kind that makes the air feel heavier. I stood and gestured toward the adjoining office, its door open just enough for them to see inside. Walnut shelves filled with books, the bestseller I'd edited displayed in a glass case, a small vase of fresh peonies on the desk. This is my office. I'm a senior editor here. My authors have been on the New York Times list. I own a condo in Manhattan. I'm debt-free. And I did it all without your support. Their faces shifted, disbelief first, then something that looked like shame. Dad cleared his throat. We didn't know. That's the point, I said softly. You never ask. For a moment I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the years of silence, the way they had dismissed me when I needed them most. You're standing in a building that requires alumni clearance. Without me, you wouldn't even be allowed past the gates. And yet, here you are, because I invited you. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Mom's voice cracked. Emily, we're proud of you. I met her eyes. I'm proud of me too. The difference is, I didn't need your approval to get here. I let the silence sit for a few seconds longer. Years ago, I would have rushed to fill it, to ease the discomfort, to make them feel better.
But not now.
They had entered my world on my invitation, and I wasn't going to hand over that power. I folded my hands on the table. If you want to be part of my life now, there are conditions. Dad's eyes narrowed. Conditions? Yes, I said simply. Because the way things were before, the dismissiveness, the favoritism, that doesn't happen anymore. If you can't respect who I am now, there's no point in pretending. Mom shifted uncomfortably. What kind of conditions? I took a slow breath. First, You start asking about my life without comparing it to anyone else's. I'm not in competition with your son. We live different paths, and both deserve respect. Dad opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. Second, you come to important events. Not just if they're convenient. Whether it's a book launch or a panel I'm speaking on, you show up. And you don't make excuses. Mom's brows pulled together, a defensive reflex, but I pressed on. Third, you talk to me like an adult. No dismissive comments. No brushing off my achievements like they're a hobby. You listen. You engage. And if we don't? Dad asked, a mix of challenge and uncertainty in his tone. Then you'll hear from me less and less, until I stop answering entirely. I said, my voice steady. It's not a threat, it's just a boundary. They were both quiet. I softened my tone slightly. Look, I'm not shutting you out because I hate you. I'm protecting the life I built. I worked too hard to let anyone, even family, pull me back into that place where I felt invisible. For the first time since they'd arrived, Mom's eyes welled. We didn't realize how much we hurt you. That's the other condition, I said gently. You acknowledge it. Not just once. You make an effort to rebuild trust. That means showing up consistently, not just when it feels comfortable. The old me would have been afraid to say all of this. But now I knew my worth. The locket in my desk drawer was proof I'd carried that lesson with me all along. Dad cleared his throat. We can try. I nodded. Trying is a start, but effort is what will keep you here. 3 months passed before I saw them again. It was at my first public book launch in Soho, a bright loft filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the low hum of conversation. My authors mingled with journalists, cameras flashed, champagne glasses clinked. I was mid-sentence with a reporter when I spotted them near the back. My mom was holding a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite. My dad, awkward in a suit jacket, was scanning the room like he wasn't sure where to stand. When they caught my eye, they didn't wave me over. They waited until I finished speaking, then approached quietly. You did amazing, Mom said, her voice almost shy. Dad nodded. We read the book. All of it. It was a small thing, but it felt bigger. Like maybe they were trying. After the event, we went out for coffee. No rushed conversations, no subtle digs. They asked about my next project, my students at the publishing workshop I'd started. They listened. It wasn't a perfect fix. It wouldn't erase the years of absence. But it was a beginning. Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened the drawer of my desk and took out the silver locket. I traced the engraving with my thumb. Know your worth. My grandmother had given it to me when I was 18, and for years, it had been a quiet reminder that I was more than the limits other people set for me. Now, it felt like something else too. Reminder that worth isn't just about proving yourself to others. It's about living a life that feels true to who you are, no matter who notices. I slipped the locket around my neck and stood by my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere beyond the skyline, my parents were heading back to their hotel. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl they'd left behind. I felt like the woman who had built a life so strong, so untouchable, that it could never again be ignored. And as I sipped my tea, I thought, if they want to be part of this world, the gates will always be there. But this time, they'll have to walk through them on my terms.